They laughed when he bought the farm for $1 until his war dog uncovered the secret buried beneath it. Everyone pitied a homeless seal's $1 farm. His dog found what they hid inside. The Blue Ridge Mountains didn't care that Caleb Turner had nowhere else to go. They didn't care about the limp in his step or the rust on his truck. All they held was silence and a barn that hummed at night. But when Titan refused to enter that barn, Caleb realized this land wasn't abandoned. It was hiding something. Comment 1 if you'd stand your ground, or 0 if you'd walk away, and tell us where you're watching from. The Blue Ridge Mountains rose like quiet guardians over Coldwater County, their ridgelines fading into a pale gray sky that carried the bite of early winter. The wind moved through the pines in long, steady breaths, bending the tops of the trees as if whispering old stories to anyone willing to listen. Down below, along a narrow stretch of highway that cut through frost-hardened fields, a rusted pickup truck climbed the final incline toward town. Inside the cab, Caleb Turner kept both hands on the wheel, his knuckles pale against sun-browned skin. The truck rattled with every bump, the heater wheezing out uneven warmth. Beside him sat Titan, a broad-shouldered German shepherd with a black saddle and sharp amber eyes. The dog sat upright, steady as stone, gaze fixed forward, ears twitching at every shift of wind. Coldwater wasn't much of a town. One diner, a hardware store, a post office that closed before dusk, and a courthouse that looked older than the hills. Caleb parked in front of the diner where the county auction notice had been taped to the window for weeks. The sign was simple: tax foreclosure property, hillside farm, minimum bid, $1. When Caleb stepped out, his right leg dragged half an inch behind the left. It wasn't obvious unless you were looking for it, but people always were. The old injury pulled against him in cold weather, a dull reminder of a blast wave that had thrown him against a concrete wall half a world away. Titan jumped down beside him, landing silently despite his size. The dog's posture changed the moment his paws touched gravel, head high, nose testing the air, eyes scanning. Inside the diner, conversation dipped for a heartbeat when Caleb walked in. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips, forks hovered above plates. The scent of bacon grease and burnt toast hung heavy under yellowed lights. "He's the one," someone muttered from a booth near the window. "That the vet who bought Denton's place? For $1. Must be desperate." Caleb heard it all. He had learned long ago that whispers carried farther than gunfire. He didn't react. He never did. He took a seat near the counter. Titan settled at his feet but remained alert, not lying down fully. The waitress, a woman in her late 50s with tired eyes and kind hands, approached with a coffee pot. "You here for the auction?" she asked gently. "Yes, ma'am." She poured without asking how he took it. "That farm's been empty near 15 years. Roof's half gone. Barn's worse. Folks say the land don't grow right." Caleb lifted the mug, steam fogging his vision for a second. "Land grows if someone tends it." She gave him a small nod, though her eyes held doubt. At the courthouse, the auction lasted less than 3 minutes. The county clerk read the parcel number in a monotone voice. No one else raised a paddle. No one else even cleared their throat. "For the record," the clerk said, peering over his glasses, "minimum bid $1. Do I have a bidder?" Caleb lifted his hand. The clerk blinked. $1. Any higher?" Silence. "Sold." The sound of the gavel echoed sharper than expected in the near-empty room. Outside, a few men lingered near the courthouse steps, hands tucked into denim jackets against the cold. One of them shook his head. "Hell of a thing," he said quietly. "Man gives $1 for a headache." Another added, "You know Denton vanished up there, right?" Caleb met their eyes evenly. "I know it's my land now." They watched him walk back to his truck, as if expecting him to change his mind halfway there. Titan was already standing in the bed of the pickup, nose lifted toward the mountains. When Caleb opened the door, the dog jumped down again and took a slow circle around him, checking, as if confirming they were intact. The drive to the farm took nearly 20 minutes along a road that narrowed into cracked pavement and finally into gravel. The truck groaned through ruts and over shallow washouts. Frost clung to fence posts like thin glass. Abandoned mailboxes leaned at odd angles, their flags rusted stiff. Then the property came into view. The farmhouse sat crooked against the slope, its white paint peeled down to gray wood. Windows stared out like blind eyes. The barn stood farther back, roof sagging in the middle as though carrying a burden too heavy to shed. Beyond that, fields rolled toward the tree line, brown and brittle under the winter sun. Caleb cut the engine. Silence settled in thick layers. No highway hum, no distant machinery, just wind and the faint creak of old timber. He stepped out slowly, boots crunching over frozen grass. Titan followed, but didn't move toward the house. Instead, he stopped midway between the truck and the barn, body angled toward the woods beyond the property line. "What is it?" Caleb asked quietly. Titan's ears flicked forward, his gaze locked on the tree line where shadows pooled between trunks. The dog's tail remained still, not wagging, not tucked, just held firm. Caleb scanned the area. Nothing moved except branches stirred by wind, yet the air felt different here, denser somehow, as if the land was listening. He walked toward the farmhouse porch, each step measured. The boards groaned under his weight when he climbed the 3 warped steps. He pushed the door open, and dust lifted into the air like a disturbed memory. Inside, the living room was bare except for an overturned chair and a fireplace blackened by old soot. The floor slanted slightly toward one corner. Light filtered through cracks in the boards, thin and pale. Titan did not follow. Caleb turned back. "Come on." The dog remained near the yard's center, eyes still on the trees. After a long moment, Titan shifted, but instead of entering the house, he moved toward the barn. He stopped 10 feet from it. The barn doors hung unevenly, one barely attached by a hinge. The interior was dark even in daylight. Wind moved through the gaps in the wood, making a low, hollow sound. Titan's posture stiffened. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply watched. Caleb walked over, joining him. Standing beside the dog, he felt it too, a faint weight pressing against his chest. Not fear exactly. Not yet. Just awareness. The mountains rose behind them, quiet and immense. The fields lay still, unclaimed. The barn leaned as if guarding something unseen. "Well," Caleb murmured, more to Titan than to himself. "Guess we start here." Titan didn't move. His eyes never left the tree line, and for the first time since buying the dollar farm, Caleb understood something clearly. This land wasn't empty. It was waiting. Caleb stood beside Titan in the brittle grass, the wind sliding down from the ridge in long, cold drafts. The barn doors creaked on their hinges, tapping softly against weathered wood. The sound carried across the pasture like a loose shutter in a storm. "Come on," Caleb said quietly. Titan didn't move. The dog's ears were forward, his body angled slightly toward the woods, but his attention kept flicking back to the barn. Not fear, not confusion, assessment. Caleb rested a hand on Titan's neck. The fur was thick beneath his fingers, warm despite the air. Titan's muscles were tense, but controlled. The kind of tension Caleb recognized from patrols overseas when something wasn't visible yet, but the ground felt wrong under your boots. He stepped toward the barn. Titan followed 3 paces behind. The doors scraped loudly when Caleb pushed them open. Dust drifted down in thin shafts of pale light, cutting through gaps in the siding. The smell inside was old hay, rusted metal, and something faintly metallic that didn't belong. Caleb paused just inside the threshold. Titan stopped outside. The dog lowered his head slightly, nostrils flaring, but he did not cross the doorway. "You've walked into worse," Caleb murmured. Titan let out a slow breath, but held position. The barn interior was larger than it had looked from outside. A loft sagged overhead, its ladder missing half its rungs. Broken equipment lay scattered: an old plow blade, rusted chains, a collapsed feed trough. The dirt floor was hard-packed, uneven. Caleb moved deeper in, boots grinding over gravel. Behind him, Titan paced the doorway but refused to step across the line of shadow. Caleb turned. "Titan." The dog's eyes met his. There was something deliberate there. A decision. Titan backed up 1 step. Caleb felt a faint chill run along his spine. He stepped back outside, joining the dog in the open air. "All right," he said softly. "Not today." They began with the farmhouse instead. Inside, Caleb worked through the afternoon in steady silence. He opened windows that hadn't been lifted in years. He swept dust into small clouds that caught sunlight like drifting smoke. He hauled broken furniture out onto the porch and stacked it in a neat pile. Titan stayed close, moving from room to room, inspecting corners, sniffing along baseboards. Every so often he would pause, head tilting toward the barn. As the sun dipped lower behind the ridge, the temperature dropped sharply. Frost crept back across the fields in thin white veins. Caleb lit a small fire in the fireplace using dry wood he'd found stacked in the shed. The flames caught slowly, reluctant at first, then steady. The crackle filled the room, warm and familiar. He sat on the floor, back against the wall, stretching his injured leg carefully. The old scar along his thigh tightened when the weather turned cold. He rotated his ankle, testing the stiffness. Titan lay near the door, not asleep, just resting with one ear, always lifted. The farmhouse groaned as night settled in. Wind moved along the roof in uneven waves. Somewhere in the walls, wood contracted with soft ticking sounds. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment, letting the fire's heat sink into his bones. And then he felt it, not heard, felt. A faint vibration beneath his palm, where it rested on the floorboards. He opened his eyes. The fire crackled normally. The wind outside hadn't changed. He pressed his hand flat against the wood. There it was again. Subtle. Rhythmic. A low, almost mechanical hum. Titan's head snapped up instantly. The dog rose to his feet and moved toward the center of the room, paws silent on the floor. He lowered his nose close to the boards, then looked at Caleb. The vibration came again, not loud enough to shake furniture, just enough to register. Caleb's breath slowed. For a split second, the room shifted. The firelight flickered into harsh desert sun. The wooden floor beneath his hand became packed sand. The hum turned sharper, metallic, buried beneath layers of earth. He saw it again the moment before detonation, the way the ground had trembled faintly through his boots, the way the air had gone tight. His pulse jumped hard in his throat. Titan pressed firmly against his side. Solid. Present. The farmhouse snapped back into focus. Caleb swallowed and forced air into his lungs. "You're here," he muttered to himself. "North Carolina. Not Helmand." Titan nudged his hand, then moved toward the doorway again. The vibration seemed slightly stronger near the hall that faced the barn. Caleb stood slowly, every muscle aware. He stepped outside into the cold night. The sky had cleared completely. Stars burned sharp above the ridge. The moon hung low, casting pale light across the pasture. The barn stood in silhouette, darker than the rest of the land. The hum was faint out here, but it was there. Titan walked ahead this time, not hesitating. He approached the barn doors and stopped again at the threshold. The dog lowered his head toward the ground near the left interior wall, just beyond the doorway. He pawed once at the dirt, stopped, looked at Caleb. Caleb moved closer, crouching beside him. He pressed his palm flat against the earth just inside the barn. The vibration traveled through the packed soil into his hand. Not natural, not wind, not settling timber. Steady, deliberate. He glanced toward the tree line again. Everything looked still, but the hum continued. Titan let out a low, restrained sound. Not quite a growl. More like a warning breath. Caleb stood slowly. "Whatever it is," he said quietly, "it's under us." The wind shifted direction, moving down from the ridge and through the barn slats, carrying a sharper chill. Caleb felt it in his chest. This wasn't just old land. It was layered. He stepped back out of the barn and closed the doors carefully, aligning them as best he could. "Tomorrow," he said. Titan didn't take his eyes off the spot where he had pawed. Caleb rested a hand on the dog's shoulder. "We'll look tomorrow." They walked back to the farmhouse together, the hum faint but persistent beneath their boots. Behind them, the barn stood silent against the moonlight. Waiting. Caleb didn't sleep much. The fire in the fireplace burned low sometime after midnight, shrinking to red embers that cast long shadows across the walls. Titan lay near the front door, head resting on his paws, but his eyes opened every time the wind shifted. Twice, Caleb rose from the floor where he had spread his old military blanket and pressed his palm against the wood boards again. The vibration remained, steady, like something breathing slowly beneath the earth. By dawn, frost coated the inside of the farmhouse windows in delicate white veins. The mountains outside were pale blue under early light, quiet and indifferent. Caleb stepped onto the porch with a cup of black coffee. The cold air hit his lungs sharply, clearing whatever sleep remained. Titan stood beside him, alert as always, gaze already fixed on the barn. "All right," Caleb murmured. "Let's find out." They crossed the field together, each step crunched through frozen grass. The barn looked smaller in daylight, less threatening, but Titan's posture told a different story. He moved straight to the left interior wall once Caleb pushed the doors open. No hesitation this time. Titan lowered his nose to the ground and began pawing with measured, purposeful strokes. Not frantic digging, controlled excavation. Caleb crouched beside him and brushed aside loose dirt with his gloved hands. The soil near the wall was slightly softer than the rest of the floor, packed, but disturbed at some point in the past. Titan dug again. A dull metallic scrape answered from below. Caleb froze. He cleared more dirt away carefully. Beneath a thin layer of packed soil lay the edge of something round and solid. Steel. Caleb leaned back slightly and wiped sweat from his brow despite the cold. "Easy," he whispered. He moved to the truck and retrieved a short-handled shovel and pry bar. Titan watched every motion, muscles tight but controlled. Back inside the barn, Caleb worked slowly, exposing more of the metal surface. Dirt fell away in heavy clumps. The outline became clearer. A circular hatch, about 3 feet in diameter. Faded paint clung to the surface in dull patches of olive drab. He brushed away the remaining soil with his sleeve. Stamped into the steel, nearly hidden by rust, was a federal insignia, an eagle crest, barely visible beneath decades of wear. Beneath it, a date. Caleb's heartbeat slowed into something deliberate. The hum beneath his boots grew slightly stronger now that the dirt was cleared. Titan stepped closer and placed one paw gently against the hatch, as if confirming what he already knew. "This isn't farming equipment," Caleb said quietly. He ran his fingers along the rim and found a recessed handle nearly sealed shut with age. It took effort to wedge the pry bar beneath it. The metal groaned when he applied pressure. For a moment it didn't move. Then, with a sharp crack of breaking rust, the seal gave way. Cold air surged upward from below. Not stale, not rotten, cold and metallic, like the inside of an industrial building. Caleb stepped back instinctively. Titan lowered his head, ears pinned forward. The hatch rose slowly, heavy but balanced on old hinges that surprisingly still functioned. Beneath it, a narrow steel ladder descended into darkness. The hum was clearer now, electrical, alive. Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small tactical flashlight. He had carried it for years. It clicked on with a clean white beam. The light cut down into the shaft. Steel walls. Reinforced. Bolted. This wasn't a root cellar. This was engineered. Titan glanced up at Caleb once. Permission. Caleb nodded once in return. They descended together. Each rung creaked faintly under Caleb's weight. Titan moved carefully, gripping the ladder with disciplined control. The shaft opened into a small chamber roughly the size of a single-car garage. The walls were lined with metal panels. Conduits ran along the ceiling. Old electrical boxes were mounted at intervals. A narrow hallway extended forward into shadow. Dust coated most surfaces in thick layers, but not all. Caleb moved slowly through the chamber. On one side sat a row of outdated communication racks. Large metal cabinets, with analog dials and thick wiring that belonged to another era. Labels faded, but still readable. Signal relay. Transmission control. Auxiliary power. He ran his hand over one panel, dust smeared beneath his fingers. Then he saw it. One cabinet toward the far wall was cleaner. Not spotless, but disturbed. The dust around it was thinner, and a faint green LED blinked steadily from a small unit mounted near the floor. Titan's low growl vibrated through the room. Caleb crouched. The unit was modern, not 1,978 equipment. A compact power module connected to the old wiring. Someone had integrated new technology into an old structure. The hum intensified slightly when Caleb leaned closer. "Someone's using this," he said under his breath. He stood and scanned the floor. Footprints, faint but visible where dust had shifted. A partial boot tread near the hallway entrance, fresh enough that the dust hadn't fully settled back into place. Titan moved toward the hallway and stopped, staring into the darkness. Caleb followed, flashlight beam cutting down the corridor. The hallway ended at another reinforced door, half open. Beyond it lay a second room. Inside, the hum was strongest. This room held more modern equipment. Compact server units stacked against one wall. A small cooling fan unit mounted high near the ceiling vent. Cables ran neatly along the floor, recently secured with black zip ties. Caleb's stomach tightened. This wasn't abandoned. It was operational. Titan suddenly snapped his head toward the vent in the ceiling. The fan rattled softly, cycling air. Caleb aimed the flashlight upward. The vent cover was slightly misaligned, one screw newer than the others. Someone had been maintaining this space. The realization settled slowly and heavily. The land hadn't just been waiting. It had been hiding something active. Caleb stepped back into the main chamber, scanning again. On a metal shelf near the ladder lay a clipboard, half buried in dust. He picked it up, blank pages, but the indentation of writing pressed into the top sheet remained visible. He angled the flashlight sideways. A series of numbers, coordinates, and below them one word written faintly, bridge. Titan's growl deepened. Caleb looked toward the ladder shaft above. The hatch stood open, a circle of pale daylight far overhead. For the first time since arriving at the farm, a new thought crossed his mind. What if someone knew he was here? The hum continued, steady and mechanical. Titan moved closer to Caleb's side, body angled protectively toward the ladder. Caleb shut off the flashlight for a moment. Darkness swallowed the chamber instantly. The hum remained. Alive. He turned the light back on. This place isn't dead, he said quietly. Titan didn't blink. Caleb looked once more at the blinking green LED on the modern unit. Someone had reactivated a piece of federal infrastructure buried under a forgotten farm, and they had done it recently. He climbed back up the ladder slowly, Titan close behind. When Caleb pushed the hatch closed, the barn felt smaller than before. He brushed dirt back over the metal just enough to conceal it from casual sight. Then he stood still in the center of the barn. The mountains outside were bright under morning sun. Peaceful, but beneath his boots, steel and circuitry hummed quietly. Not abandoned. Active. Caleb met Titan's gaze. This just got bigger, he said. Titan's ears flicked toward the tree line again, as if someone might already be listening. Caleb stood motionless in the barn, listening with him. The wind moved gently through the pines. A hawk circled high above the ridge. Nothing else stirred. Still, the feeling remained. He finished brushing loose dirt over the hatch, not to bury it fully, but to disguise its outline from a quick glance. Then, he stepped back and scanned the barn one last time. In daylight, it looked as harmless as it had the day before. Splintered beams, cracked siding, sagging loft. But Caleb now knew what lay beneath. Active equipment, modern wiring, a blinking green LED that didn't belong in a relic from 1978. He closed the barn doors carefully and walked back toward the farmhouse with Titan at his side. The mountains seemed quieter than before, or maybe he was just listening differently. He spent the next few hours working methodically. He nailed loose boards along the porch railing, replaced a broken hinge on the back door, organized tools on the kitchen counter in precise rows. Routine steadied him. Titan stayed outside more than usual, circling the perimeter of the property. Every few minutes, he would pause, nose lifted, reading the wind. By mid-afternoon, a low hum of a different kind rolled up the gravel drive. An engine. Caleb stepped onto the porch. A dark SUV eased around the bend, tires crunching slowly over stone. The vehicle was clean, too clean for this stretch of mountain road. Sunlight reflected sharply off polished chrome. Titan positioned himself one step ahead of Caleb, body tall, silent. The SUV came to a stop near the fence line. A man stepped out. Mid-30s, clean haircut, charcoal jacket that probably cost more than Caleb's truck. Polished boots unsuited for mud. He smiled before speaking, like someone who had rehearsed the expression. "Afternoon," he called out easily. "You must be Mr. Turner." Caleb didn't move from the porch. "That depends who's asking." The man gave a small chuckle and walked a few steps closer, hands visible. "Gavin Shaw, Summit Ridge Infrastructure." Titan's gaze locked onto him immediately. Gavin noticed the dog and hesitated just slightly. "Beautiful animal," he said. "German Shepherd, retired military," Caleb replied. "Ah," Gavin nodded. "Figures. Ah, 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 ah." The wind lifted lightly between them. "What can I do for you?" Caleb asked. Gavin clasped his hands together. "I represent a development firm interested in expanding broadband and energy systems throughout Coldwater County. We've been reviewing land parcels for potential infrastructure partnerships." He glanced casually toward the barn. "This property sits in a strategic location." Caleb watched him carefully. "I just bought it." "Yes," Gavin said smoothly. "For $1, quite the deal." He stepped closer to the fence, boots crunching deliberately. "We're prepared to offer you $120,000 for it." The number hung in the air. Titan let out a low, measured rumble. Caleb didn't react outwardly, but his pulse shifted. "You drove up a dead-end road," Caleb said evenly, "to offer a stranger $120,000 for land you haven't walked?" Gavin smiled again, thinner this time. We've conducted our assessments. Assessments? Caleb asked. Environmental, structural, liability considerations. He let the last phrase linger. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. Liability? Gavin tilted his head. Older structures, underground concerns, safety hazards. The barn creaked behind them as wind pressed through its boards. Titan stepped forward half a pace. Gavin's smile faltered. I assure you, he continued quickly, we simply want to save you the burden of restoration costs. A property like this can become complicated. Caleb studied him. How do you know what's under it? The question slipped out quietly, but the air shifted sharply. Gavin blinked once. I'm referring to the age of the foundations, Mr. Turner. Nothing more. Titan's growl deepened. Gavin took one involuntary step back. You might consider the offer, he said, smoothing his tone. It's generous. I'm not selling. The answer came without hesitation. Gavin's eyes cooled slightly. You may want to reconsider. Projects move forward whether individuals cooperate or not. Caleb descended the porch steps slowly. Titan matched him. They stopped a few yards from the fence. This land isn't for sale, Caleb said calmly. The two men held each other's gaze. For a moment, the mountain air felt tight. Gavin exhaled softly. Well, he said, you have my card. He pulled a small white rectangle from his jacket and slid it onto the top rail of the fence. If you change your mind. Titan barked once sharp and sudden. Gavin flinched. Then he recovered his composure, turned, and walked back to the SUV. The engine started smoothly. Gravel spat lightly as the vehicle reversed. Caleb watched it disappear down the drive. Only when the sound faded entirely did he step toward the fence and pick up the card. Summit Ridge Infrastructure. Gavin Shaw, Regional Operations Director. A local number, but printed beneath it was a corporate headquarters address in Charlotte. Caleb turned the card over. Blank. He slipped it into his pocket. Titan moved toward the barn again, sniffing along the edge of the foundation. Caleb followed. That's when he saw them. Tire tracks. Fresh. Two distinct tread patterns near the side of the barn. One matching the SUV. The other older, wider, deeper. He crouched and pressed his fingers into the gravel, still slightly damp beneath the surface. Someone else had driven here recently. Titan's nose traced the tracks carefully. He moved toward the tree line, then stopped abruptly, staring into the woods. Caleb stood slowly. You weren't the first visitor, he murmured. The wind picked up, rustling leaves in uneven bursts. For a split second, Caleb felt that old tension again, the quiet before contact. He turned slowly in a full circle, scanning every angle of the property. The farmhouse, the barn, the ridge beyond, the gravel drive stretching downhill. Nothing moved, but the offer had come too fast, and Gavin Shaw had known too much. Caleb walked back toward the house, Titan glued to his side. As they reached the porch, Caleb felt it again, faint but undeniable. The vibration beneath his boots, the hum below ground, active, hidden, and now, apparently, worth $120,000 to the wrong people. He looked back toward the mountains. This isn't about farming, he said quietly. Titan's ears remained fixed on the tree line, as if the land itself had just shifted from waiting to watching. That night, the mountains felt closer. The sky clouded over before sunset, swallowing the last of the light. A damp wind crept down from the ridge, sliding along the farmhouse walls with a hollow whistle. Caleb reinforced the back door with a spare length of lumber and checked every window latch twice. Titan shadowed him without instruction. The farmhouse lights flickered once just after 8. Caleb froze in the hallway. The hum beneath the floor was steady, unchanged, but the house wiring buzzed differently now, strained. Titan lifted his head toward the ceiling. The lights flickered again. Then everything went dark, total black. No porch light, no kitchen glow, no hum from the refrigerator Caleb had managed to power that afternoon. The only sound left was wind, and beneath it, footsteps, faint, outside. Titan's body stiffened instantly. He did not bark. He did not move. He waited. Caleb's pulse slowed instead of quickening. The world narrowed to manageable pieces, breathing, listening, assessing. He reached into the kitchen drawer where he had placed his flashlight earlier and clicked it on low beam. He kept it angled toward the floor. Two silhouettes passed briefly in front of the curtained living room window. Slow, deliberate, not curious teenagers, not hunters, professionals. Titan's ears tracked their movement precisely. A soft metallic click sounded near the back door. Testing the handle, Caleb moved without haste. He positioned himself just out of sight beside the doorway, weight balanced carefully on his good leg. Titan slipped into place at his side, silent as smoke. The back doorknob turned slowly. Whoever was outside applied steady pressure. The reinforced board held. A whisper of conversation drifted through the wood. Locked. Cut the power first. It's done. Another metallic sound. A pry bar pressed against the frame. The wood groaned. Titan's muscles coiled. Caleb placed one hand lightly against the dog's shoulder weight. The pry bar forced the latch halfway free before splintering wood gave way with a sharp crack. The door burst inward. A masked figure stepped through the threshold. Before his boot fully cleared the frame, Titan lunged. Not wild, not frantic, precise. He struck low and hard, knocking the intruder off balance and driving him sideways into the wall. The man fell with a grunt, weapon clattering across the kitchen floor. The second figure rushed in behind him. Caleb moved. Fast. He intercepted the second intruder with controlled force, redirecting momentum and driving him back into the doorframe. A brief struggle, boots scraping wood, breath heavy in the dark. Titan held the first man pinned, teeth bared inches from his masked face, but not biting down. Waiting for command. Drop it, Caleb said evenly. The second intruder hesitated, then bolted. He sprinted through the broken doorway into the dark pasture. Titan looked toward Caleb for permission. Stay, Caleb ordered. The dog did not chase. The captured intruder struggled once beneath Titan's weight. Don't, Caleb said quietly. The man froze. Caleb retrieved the dropped weapon from the floor and slid it out of reach. He then pulled a zip tie from his pocket. He had begun carrying them again after Gavin's visit and secured the man's wrists efficiently. Outside, the sound of running footsteps faded into the woods. The wind carried nothing else. Caleb flipped the flashlight to full beam and angled it toward the man's jacket. Black tactical fabric, professional stitching. On the upper sleeve, partially torn during the struggle, a stitched patch remained visible. Summit Ridge subcontractor. Caleb's jaw tightened. He removed the man's mask. Mid-20s. Clean-shaven. Fear flashing in his eyes. You weren't here to steal tools, Caleb said calmly. The man swallowed hard. Titan's growl deepened slightly. What were you looking for? Caleb asked. Silence. Caleb shifted his weight, careful on his injured leg. You cut the power first, he continued. That means you knew I'd notice movement. You came prepared. The man's breathing quickened. Just checking the property, he muttered. Checking what? No answer. Caleb leaned closer. You weren't scouting, he said quietly. You were searching. The wind pushed through the broken doorway again. Colder now. The hum beneath the floor remained steady. Alive. Titan glanced toward the barn. The man's eyes flicked the same direction involuntarily. That was enough. Caleb stood. You can sit there until the sheriff arrives, he said. At the word sheriff, the man stiffened. No cops, he blurted out quickly. Titan's ears pricked. Caleb studied him. No cops, he repeated. Why? The man's jaw tightened shut. Caleb didn't push further. He walked to the edge of the porch and scanned the pasture. In the distance, faint movement flickered between trees. The second intruder hadn't gone far. Watching, Caleb turned back inside and secured the broken door as best he could for the moment. He tied the intruder to a heavy kitchen support beam instead of calling immediately. He wanted time. Time to think. Titan sat squarely in front of the man, unblinking. Caleb stepped into the hallway and pressed his palm against the floorboards again. The vibration felt slightly stronger now, or maybe it was his imagination. He walked back to the kitchen and crouched in front of the captured man. You tell whoever sent you, Caleb said evenly, that I'm not leaving. The man stared at him, fear and something else, uncertainty, mixing in his expression. You don't understand, he whispered. Then explain it. The man hesitated, then shook his head once. They'll come back. Caleb didn't doubt it. Outside, wind swept harder through the field, rattling loose boards on the barn. Titan shifted slightly, eyes narrowing. The land wasn't just watching anymore. It was reacting. Caleb rose slowly and walked toward the window, looking out into the dark pasture. Somewhere beyond the trees, an engine turned over briefly, then cut off. They were still nearby. The first move had been made, and it wasn't subtle anymore. By dawn, frost had sealed over the broken doorway like thin glass. Caleb had secured the captured intruder in the back of his truck before first light and driven him down the mountain road, leaving him at the Coldwater County Sheriff's substation with a brief explanation and no further detail. The deputy on duty had looked confused, sleepy, and underprepared. Caleb hadn't mentioned Summit Ridge. He hadn't mentioned the bunker. Not yet. By the time he returned to the farm, Titan was pacing near the barn, restless. The hum beneath the ground hadn't stopped all night. If anything, it felt steadier, deliberate. "They're not going to stop," Caleb murmured. Titan's ears flicked toward him. Caleb made his decision quickly. If someone was willing to break in for whatever lay beneath that barn, he needed proof, documentation, something solid. The blinking unit downstairs had likely stored data logs, signals, transmissions. He wasn't going to leave it active for them to retrieve. Mid-morning light stretched across the pasture as Caleb gathered what he needed. Flashlight, multi-tool, spare battery pack, small canvas duffel. Titan stayed glued to his side. Inside the barn, the dirt still bore faint signs of last night's disturbance. Caleb brushed aside the soil again, exposing the steel hatch fully this time. The metal felt colder than before. He lifted it slowly. The hum intensified slightly, reverberating faintly up the shaft. Titan descended first. Careful, silent. Caleb followed. The air underground felt denser today, charged. In the main chamber, the green LED still blinked steadily. The dust had shifted near the hallway entrance. Fresh, they had been here. Titan's low growl echoed softly against the steel walls. Caleb moved quickly now, no hesitation. He entered the server room and knelt beside the modern units. Compact drives were mounted inside a small rack, portable, detachable. He unplugged the first one carefully and slid it into his duffel. The hum changed tone slightly, a higher pitch, like a system adjusting to interference. He reached for the second drive, and then, a flash of white light exploded in the doorway. A deafening bang slammed through the corridor. Flashbang. The shockwave hit like a physical shove. Caleb's ears rang violently. His vision blurred into white haze. He instinctively rolled sideways, covering his head as debris rattled against metal walls. Titan barked sharply, then lunged. Gunfire cracked inside the confined space. 2 sharp reports. Muzzle flashes flickered through smoke. Caleb forced himself upright despite the ringing in his skull. He saw a dark silhouette at the end of the hallway, partially masked, weapon raised. Titan launched forward again, closing distance faster than thought. Another shot. Titan's body jerked midair. A sharp yelp tore through the chamber. Caleb's vision snapped into focus. Titan hit the ground hard but scrambled forward anyway, tackling the intruder against the wall. The weapon skidded across the concrete floor. Caleb moved. Training overtook everything else. He reached the attacker in 3 strides, disarmed him cleanly, and forced him face down onto the floor. The struggle was brief and controlled. Then silence. Smoke drifted lazily beneath the steel ceiling. The hum remained. Caleb turned. Titan was on the floor near the doorway. Still, blood darkened the concrete beneath his shoulder. "No," Caleb breathed. He dropped beside him instantly. Titan's eyes were open, alert, breathing shallow but steady. Caleb pressed his hands against the wound, applying pressure. The bullet had struck high near the shoulder, not center mass. "Stay with me," he murmured. Titan tried to rise. "Don't." The dog obeyed, though every muscle trembled. The intruder groaned weakly nearby, restrained but conscious. Caleb ignored him. His entire focus narrowed to the weight of Titan's body beneath his hands. "You've pulled me out before," Caleb whispered, voice shaking despite himself. "You don't get to quit now." Blood seeped between his fingers. The air underground felt suffocating. He needed out. He slid the duffel over his shoulder with one hand, while lifting Titan carefully with the other. The dog let out a low sound, but did not resist. The climb up the ladder felt endless. Caleb's injured leg screamed under the added weight, but he didn't slow. He pushed through the hatch into cold daylight and laid Titan gently on the barn floor. The mountains were bright, too bright. Caleb tore a strip from his own shirt and tightened a pressure bandage around the wound as best he could. Titan's eyes never left his. Steady, loyal. "You're not done," Caleb said, voice breaking. "Not here." In the distance, faint sirens began to rise from down the valley. Someone had heard the shots, or someone had already called them. Caleb glanced toward the tree line. The second attacker was gone. Escaped. He looked back at the barn, at the steel beneath the soil. At the blinking green light, still visible below through the open hatch, this wasn't intimidation anymore. It was escalation, and Titan had taken the hit meant for him. Caleb lifted the dog carefully into the truck's back seat, laying him across an old wool blanket. He climbed behind the wheel, hands streaked red. The engine roared to life. As the truck sped down the mountain road toward the nearest ranch, he knew Martha Hale's place, 5 miles west. Caleb kept one hand on Titan's neck. "Stay with me," he repeated. The mountains blurred past. The hum beneath the farm continued, unseen, active. But for the first time since buying the dollar farm, Caleb felt something stronger than suspicion. Fear. Real. Personal. Because this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about the only partner who had never left his side. The truck fishtailed once on a gravel bend before Caleb corrected it. His injured leg throbbed with each press of the pedal, but he barely felt it. One hand gripped the steering wheel. The other rested firmly against Titan's neck, fingers buried in thick fur, feeling for the steady pulse beneath. "Stay with me," he repeated quietly. Titan's breathing was shallow but rhythmic. His eyes were open, focused on Caleb, even as the world blurred past the windows. 5 miles west, down a narrower road lined with split-rail fencing and dormant hayfields, stood the Hale Ranch. Martha Hale had served 20 years as an Army combat medic before retiring to these mountains. Caleb had met her once at the Coldwater feed store. She had noticed his limp without staring at it. Not many people managed that. The ranch house came into view, a low white structure with a metal roof and a porch wrapped in wind chimes that rattled softly in the cold. Caleb braked hard in the dirt driveway and jumped out before the truck fully settled. "Martha!" he called. The front door swung open almost immediately. Martha stepped out wearing flannel and work boots, gray hair pulled back tight. One look at the back seat told her everything. "Inside," she said firmly. "Now." They carried Titan into the house and laid him on a wide wooden table near the kitchen window. Sunlight spilled across the floor in pale stripes. The scent of coffee and antiseptic mingled in the air. Martha worked quickly, movements efficient and calm. "Through and through?" she asked. Caleb shook his head. "High shoulder. I think it passed clean." She nodded once. "Good. Hold him steady." Caleb cradled Titan's head gently as Martha cleaned the wound and applied pressure. The dog didn't fight. He didn't whimper. He watched Caleb the entire time. "You stubborn fool," Caleb murmured, voice thick. Minutes stretched long and thin. Finally, Martha leaned back slightly. "It missed bone, missed lung. He's lucky." She looked up at Caleb. "Or you are." Caleb exhaled for what felt like the first time since the explosion underground. Titan's breathing steadied. Martha bandaged the wound securely and administered antibiotics. "He'll need rest," she said. "And you need to tell me what happened." Caleb stepped back from the table and leaned against the counter, hands braced on cool wood. He told her about the barn, about the hatch, about the bunker humming beneath his farm, about the green light, about the men. Martha didn't interrupt. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. "That land's been whispered about for years," she said, finally. Caleb looked up. "Whispers how?" She wiped her hands on a towel and poured him a cup of black coffee. "Back in the late 70s, the government built communication relays all through these mountains. Cold War stuff. Some got shut down, some got forgotten." She paused. "Some didn't." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You've heard about this farm before?" "Not directly. But Denton, the man who owned it before, he used to talk about hearing humming under the barn at night. Folks thought he was losing it." She met Caleb's eyes. "He disappeared 6 years ago." The word hung heavy. "Disappeared." "Sheriff looked into it?" Caleb asked. Martha's expression shifted slightly. "Sheriff Briggs closed the file quick. Said Denton probably wandered off. Man had no family." Caleb thought of the fresh footprints in the bunker, the blinking LED. "He didn't wander," Caleb said quietly. Titan shifted slightly on the table, trying to lift his head. "Easy," Caleb whispered, placing a hand gently on his chest. The dog settled. Martha studied them both. "You're not safe up there," she said. Caleb looked toward the window, where the mountains rolled in layered blue shadows. "I'm not leaving." She gave a small nod as if she expected that answer. "Then don't fight this alone." Caleb didn't respond immediately. The adrenaline from earlier had drained out of him, leaving something heavier in its place. He lowered himself onto the porch steps outside and let the cold air hit his face. Silence stretched across the fields. For a moment, Memories crept back in dusty roads overseas, smoke curling into the sky, the weight of loss pressing down long after the noise stopped. Titan had pulled him from collapsed concrete once, dug through debris until his teeth found fabric. He had refused to leave Caleb buried, and today he had taken a bullet instead. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "I won't bury another partner," he said under his breath. Inside, Titan let out a low, steady breath. Martha stepped onto the porch beside him. "You know," she said quietly, "there are ways to bring light into dark places, carefully." Caleb glanced at her. "You mean the sheriff?" She didn't answer directly. "Just be sure," she said, "that whoever you trust isn't already part of the problem." The wind shifted again, colder now. Down in the valley, faint sirens echoed briefly before fading. Caleb stood slowly. "I need to go back," he said. Martha placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Not tonight." He hesitated. She held his gaze. "He needs you steady," she said, "not running on adrenaline." Caleb looked back inside where Titan lay bandaged but breathing. He nodded once. That night he slept in a chair beside Titan's makeshift bed near the fireplace. The ranch house creaked softly in the cold. The wind moved steadily through pasture fences. Caleb woke twice to Titan shifting, checking. Each time, their eyes met in the firelight, alive. Between heartbeats, between fear and resolve, something changed inside Caleb. The land under his farm was active, dangerous, but it was no longer abstract. They had escalated. So would he. Outside, the Blue Ridge Mountains stood quiet and watchful. But beneath one hillside barn, steel and circuitry continued to hum, waiting for the next move. Morning arrived pale and brittle over the Hale Ranch. Frost clung to fence rails, and a thin mist hovered low across the fields. Inside the house, Titan slept deeply for the first time since the gunshot, his chest rising in steady rhythm beneath fresh bandages. Caleb stood at the kitchen sink, staring out across the pasture. He hadn't returned to his farm yet. He needed Titan's stable first. He needed his head clear. The gravel crunch of tires broke the silence. Caleb didn't turn immediately. Martha did. A county cruiser rolled slowly up the driveway, blue lettering muted under morning light. Sheriff Walter Briggs stepped out, hat low, coat collar turned up against the cold. He walked with the easy confidence of someone who believed he owned the road beneath his boots. "Well," Martha muttered softly. "That was quicker than I expected." Caleb stepped onto the porch. Titan, though still weak, lifted his head inside and let out a low, warning growl. Sheriff Briggs removed his gloves as he approached. "Morning," he said casually. "Heard there was some excitement up on your new property last night, Mr. Turner." His eyes flicked briefly toward the house, calculating. "Excitement travels fast," Caleb replied. Briggs smiled faintly. "Small county." Gunshots echo. He stepped closer to the porch rail. "You apprehended one of them boys, I hear. I left him at your station." "Deputies processing him now." Briggs tilted his head slightly. "Funny thing, though. He claims he was checking for structural hazards." Caleb didn't blink. "Hazards don't usually carry weapons." Briggs's smile thinned. "No, they don't." Silence stretched between them, broken only by wind rattling the porch chimes. Briggs shifted his weight. "Mind telling me what's under that barn?" The question landed softly but directly. Caleb's pulse slowed. "I didn't mention a barn." Briggs looked at him evenly. "You bought land that's had county inspection flags before. Old infrastructure, abandoned utilities." He shrugged. "My office has records." "What kind of infrastructure?" Caleb asked calmly. Briggs hesitated, just a fraction too long. "Old Cold War relay station," he said, "decommissioned decades ago." Caleb studied him. "How deep?" The sheriff's expression didn't change. "Deep enough to cause trouble if tampered with." The word deep hung in the air. Caleb hadn't disclosed depth to anyone. Not the deputy. Not Martha. Not even the intruder. Behind him, Titan's growl grew slightly stronger. Briggs glanced toward the door. "Dog's protective," he observed. "He's precise," Caleb replied. Briggs leaned casually against the porch rail. "Look, Mr. Turner, I'm here to make sure you don't get yourself wrapped up in something unnecessary. That land's been complicated for years." "Complicated how?" The sheriff's gaze drifted toward the ridge, as if measuring the distance. "Certain private contractors have arrangements with the county. Technical oversight, signal routing, maintenance of dormant lines." Caleb felt something settle heavily in his chest. Dormant, he repeated. Briggs's eyes flicked back to him. You don't want to go digging into systems you don't understand. Caleb stepped down off the porch slowly, stopping within arm's length. I understand when someone cuts power to my house. Briggs's jaw tightened. Maybe you're misreading this. Am I? The air between them sharpened. Titan appeared in the doorway behind Caleb, unsteady but upright, bandaged shoulder visible. His amber eyes locked onto the sheriff. Briggs's hand drifted unconsciously toward his belt, just resting, not drawing, but ready. Caleb noticed. You've got measurements, Caleb said quietly. You mentioned depth. Briggs held his gaze. County engineers filed reports in the 70s. And you've reviewed them recently? The sheriff's eyes cooled. Mr. Turner, he said slowly, you bought that farm for $1. That should tell you something. Caleb felt the wind shift again. You're protecting something, he said. Briggs didn't answer. Instead, he straightened fully. I'm advising you, he said evenly, to let Summit Ridge handle their obligations without interference. Titan's growl sharpened, cutting through the quiet morning like a blade. Briggs glanced at the dog again. Control your animal. Caleb didn't move. Control your county, he replied. The tension held for several long seconds. Then Briggs reached slowly inside his coat. Martha stepped onto the porch behind Caleb. Careful, Walter, she said calmly. Briggs pulled out, not a weapon, but a folded document. He held it loosely. Cease and desist notice, he said. Pending investigation into potential federal property disturbance. He extended it. Caleb didn't take it. You're serving me paperwork before filing charges? Briggs smiled faintly. Prevention is cleaner than prosecution. The wind lifted harder, rattling the porch roof. Titan shifted his stance slightly, positioning himself between Caleb and the sheriff. Briggs's hand returned once more to the edge of his holster, not gripping it, but close enough to signal intent. You don't want this to escalate, Briggs said quietly. Caleb met his eyes. It already has. Silence. Then, in one swift motion, Briggs withdrew his hand from his coat, and instead of the paper, rested it briefly on his service weapon. Not drawn, but unmistakably displayed. A warning. Titan stepped forward despite the pain in his shoulder. Caleb placed one steady hand on the dog's collar. The sheriff watched that exchange carefully. Finally, he lowered his hand. For your own sake, Briggs said, voice quieter now. Walk away. He placed the folded notice on the porch railing and turned toward his cruiser. The engine started smoothly. Gravel sprayed lightly as he backed down the drive. Caleb remained still long after the vehicle disappeared. Titan leaned against his leg slightly, breathing harder from the effort. Martha stepped beside him. He slipped, she said. Caleb nodded. He knew too much. The mountains stood quiet, bathed in morning light. But something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just corporate interest anymore. Local law enforcement was involved. Complicit. Caleb picked up the folded notice and glanced at it. Technical disturbance of dormant federal communication infrastructure. Dormant. The word felt hollow now. He looked down at Titan. They're not dormant, he said softly. Titan's ears flicked toward the ridge, as if listening for the hum only they seemed to hear. And for the first time since buying the farm, Caleb understood something clearly. This wasn't just about uncovering what was hidden. It was about deciding whether to expose it. No matter who stood in the way, by late afternoon, Caleb had made up his mind. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a politician. He didn't have leverage inside Coldwater County. But he knew one thing from hard experience when institutions closed ranks. Sunlight was the only force that ever forced them open. Martha stood at her kitchen table, while Caleb spread the retrieved hard drives and portable power unit across the wood surface. You sure those things won't trace you? She asked quietly. They already know I have them, Caleb replied. They wouldn't have come back if they didn't. Titan lay on a wool blanket nearby, bandaged shoulder secured, eyes tracking every movement. He was weaker, but the focus hadn't faded. Martha slid a folded piece of paper across the table. There's someone you might call, she said. Caleb glanced down. Hannah Reed, independent investigative reporter. She did a series last year on water rights mismanagement up in Boone, Martha added. Didn't back down when they leaned on her. See. Caleb hesitated only a moment before dialing the number. Hannah answered on the third ring. Her voice was calm, sharp, and direct. I don't chase rumors, she said when Caleb finished explaining the surface details. But I do chase infrastructure with fresh wiring in a decommissioned federal bunker. She arrived just before sunset. Her truck was dusty and practical, camera cases stacked in the back seat. She stepped out wearing hiking boots and a windbreaker, hair pulled into a loose knot. She shook Caleb's hand firmly. "You're the seal who bought the dollar farm." "That's me." She glanced at Titan. "And that's the reason you're still breathing." Titan watched her carefully, but did not growl. Inside Martha's living room, Hannah set up her laptop and connected the drives Caleb had removed. The screen flickered. Data directories filled the display. Transmission logs, signal routing tables, IP mapping spreadsheets. Hannah leaned closer, fingers moving quickly across keys. "These aren't relic systems," she murmured. Caleb watched her face as she worked. "What are they?" She swallowed once. "Live routing infrastructure." She turned the laptop toward him. Rows of civilian identifiers scrolled down the screen, names partially redacted, geographic coordinates, timestamps. "This isn't foreign intelligence," she said quietly. "This is domestic monitoring." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Monitoring who?" "Anyone flagged," she replied. "Journalists, activists, infrastructure contractors, whistleblowers." She clicked into another folder. "Encrypted transfer logs. Summit Ridge isn't building broadband," she said. "They're piggybacking on old Cold War relay systems to reroute surveillance streams outside standard oversight." Martha exhaled slowly from the doorway. "That's illegal," she said. "It's more than illegal," Hannah replied. "It's layered. Private contractors running government equipment off-book." Titan rose slowly and limped toward the laptop. He sniffed near the lower edge of the device, then moved toward the duffel bag. Caleb followed his line of movement. "What is it?" Titan nudged the canvas bag with his nose. Caleb unzipped it fully and emptied the remaining contents onto the table. A secondary drive unit slid free. Smaller, heavier. He hadn't seen it in the chaos underground. Hannah's eyes widened slightly. "Plug that in." The screen blinked again. A hidden partition loaded automatically. And then, video files. Hundreds. Hannah opened one. Grainy footage appeared on the screen. A public town hall meeting. Faces visible. Voices recorded. Time-stamped and archived without consent. Caleb felt a wave of cold settle in his chest. "They're cataloging civilians," Hannah said. She clicked another file. Surveillance from a nearby warehouse. Then another. Communications between Summit Ridge executives referencing asset preservation and containment measures. Martha stepped closer. "Containment?" she repeated. Hannah scrolled further, and then stopped. There, buried in a subfolder labeled Rural Node Maintenance, was a file stamped 6 years ago. Coldwater County Denton Property Incident. Caleb's breath slowed. Hannah opened it. A report summary filled the screen. "Uncooperative landowner," she read quietly. "Recommended neutralization of access." The footage cut abruptly. No follow-up, no closure. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. "He didn't wander off," he said. "No," Hannah replied. "He stood in the way." Silence settled heavily over the room. Titan rested his head against Caleb's knee. Alive. Grounding. Hannah shut the laptop slowly. "If we publish this," she said carefully, "it won't be quiet." Caleb met her gaze. "I'm not looking for quiet." She nodded once. "Then we don't file it through local channels. We go live." Martha looked between them. "That'll force federal eyes," she said. "Exactly," Hannah replied. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling fence rails along the pasture. Caleb stepped onto the porch, Titan following slowly beside him. The Blue Ridge Mountains stretched into dusk, purple and vast. Beneath one hillside barn, steel and circuitry still hummed. But now, for the first time, Caleb understood what it was carrying. Not just signals, not just data, leverage, control, and silence. He knelt carefully and rested his forehead against Titan's. "They thought we were alone," he murmured. Titan's tail thumped once against the porch boards. Caleb stood slowly. "We're not." Inside, Hannah's fingers began typing again, preparing a secure uplink. The next move wouldn't be hidden underground. It would be visible. And once it started, there would be no putting it back. Hannah worked fast. By nightfall, she had secured an encrypted satellite uplink from her truck, positioning the portable dish at the edge of Martha's pasture, where the sky opened wide above the valley. The signal would bounce out of Coldwater County entirely before anyone local could intercept it. "We stream from your property," she told Caleb. "The footage of the bunker, the drives, the logs, we publish in real time." Caleb nodded. "If they're going to try and stop it, they'll do it there." He meant the farm. Martha folded her arms. You're walking back into the lion's mouth. Caleb met her eyes calmly. It's already in my barn. They moved just after dusk. The truck lights remained off as Caleb navigated the final mile using memory and moonlight. Titan lay in the back seat, bandaged but alert, refusing to be left behind despite Martha's protests. When they reached the property, the farmhouse stood dark and still. Too still. Caleb stepped out first, scanning the pasture. The hum beneath the ground felt almost louder now. Alive. Hannah parked her truck near the wooden bridge that spanned the shallow creek leading to the farm's gravel drive. She began unloading equipment immediately, setting up cameras and the satellite uplink. Once I go live, she said quietly, there's no turning it off. Caleb glanced at Titan. The dog's ears were already tracking something in the distance. Headlights. Far down the mountain road. More than one set. They're early, Caleb said. Hannah's hands moved faster. Inside the barn, Caleb reopened the hatch and descended once more, Titan following despite the stiffness in his shoulder. He powered on one of the recovered units briefly, enough to capture live footage of the blinking LED and active servers underground. Hannah's camera recorded everything. Streaming in 30 seconds, she called from outside. Caleb climbed back up and sealed the hatch partially, leaving enough exposed to show what lay beneath. The headlights grew brighter. Multiple vehicles now. Gravel crunched sharply at the base of the drive. Summit Ridge contractors moved with purpose, stepping out in dark tactical jackets, spreading across the pasture in coordinated formation. Not chaotic. Trained. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to retrieve. Titan positioned himself at the barn entrance, body low but steady. Caleb stepped into the open field, visible but calm. Hannah's voice came through a small earpiece. We're live. Across the country, screens began lighting up. The satellite uplink pulsed green. Caleb raised his voice just enough. You don't want this public. The lead contractor, face partially covered, stepped forward. You're interfering with federal assets, he said evenly. Dormant assets? Caleb replied. The man's jaw tightened. Behind him, two contractors moved toward the barn. Titan barked sharply, warning. Caleb shifted position, blocking their path without aggression but without yielding. You shut this down now, the lead contractor said. It's already out. Hannah's voice echoed faintly from the truck. The contractors hesitated. In the distance, sirens began to wail faintly far off, but growing. Someone was watching. The lead contractor made a decision. Take the drives, he ordered quietly. They advanced. Caleb moved fast. He triggered a length of rope he had anchored earlier across the narrow approach to the barn. One contractor stumbled, falling hard onto frozen ground. Another slipped in the loose gravel Caleb had deliberately spread near the entrance. Not violent, not reckless. Controlled terrain management. Titan lunged toward the third man approaching from the side, cutting off his path with a precise snap of teeth inches from his forearm. The man froze instinctively. Gunfire cracked once into the air, warning shots, not aimed. The mountains echoed the sound like thunder. Hannah's camera caught everything. This is live, she shouted. Back off. The wooden bridge at the edge of the property became the choke point. Caleb retreated slowly toward it, forcing the contractors to funnel their approach. Titan stayed just ahead of him, guarding the flank. The satellite uplink indicator blinked steady green. Online viewership climbed by the second. The lead contractor glanced at his phone. His face shifted slightly. They're watching, he muttered. Sirens grew louder. Not just county this time. Different tone, different cadence. Federal. The contractors hesitated again. Caleb stood firm at the center of the bridge. This was the choice. He could retreat into the woods with Titan and let the land swallow them until the noise died down. Or he could stand where he was and let the cameras record everything. He didn't move. Titan stood beside him, shoulder bandage stark against dark fur. The contractors stepped back first. One by one, engines roared to life. Headlights spun away from the farm, tires spitting gravel as vehicles retreated down the mountain road. The field fell silent except for the rising wail of incoming sirens. Hannah exhaled sharply. We're trending nationwide, she said. Caleb didn't react to that. He lowered himself slowly onto one knee and rested a hand against Titan's neck. You good? He asked softly. Titan's tail moved once. Steady. In the distance, flashing lights appeared along the road. Multiple vehicles. Official. Caleb stood again. The land beneath the barn still hummed. But tonight, it wasn't hidden. It was illuminated, and there would be no burying it again. The first federal SUV crested the bend, just as the live stream viewer count crossed into 6 digits. Red and blue lights painted the frost-covered pasture in flashing waves. Gravel crunched sharply as multiple vehicles rolled in behind the wooden bridge, engines idling low but deliberate. Caleb didn't move from where he stood. Titan remained at his side, chest rising steadily, though fatigue pulled at his frame. The bandage at his shoulder was spotted faintly with dried blood, but he stood firm. Hannah lowered the camera slightly but did not cut the stream. "Still live," she murmured. 2 men in dark windbreakers marked with small federal insignias stepped out first. They scanned the field quickly, then approached with measured caution. Behind them, another vehicle door opened. Sheriff Walter Briggs stepped out. He looked smaller in the floodlights. Not weaker, but exposed. His eyes locked onto Caleb immediately. One of the federal agents spoke first. "Mr. Turner?" "That's right. You reported active surveillance infrastructure operating without federal authorization?" Caleb gestured calmly toward the barn. "It's beneath that structure. Live, wired, and documented." The agent glanced toward Hannah's camera. "You've made this public?" "Yes." The agent nodded once. "Good." 2 additional agents moved past Caleb and entered the barn carefully. Within minutes, the steel hatch was fully exposed again. Floodlights illuminated the ladder shaft, beams cutting through cold air. Inside the barn, the hum echoed faintly. Sheriff Briggs stepped forward abruptly. "You don't have jurisdiction without county coordination," he said sharply. The lead agent turned slowly toward him. "Sheriff Briggs?" Briggs stiffened slightly. "Yes." The agent pulled a folder from inside his coat. "We've been monitoring Summit Ridge infrastructure for irregular contract routing for months." Briggs' expression shifted. "We have reason to believe local oversight failed to report unauthorized node reactivation," the agent continued. "The ass." Caleb watched Briggs carefully. "You're accusing my office?" Briggs demanded. The agent met his gaze evenly. "We're reviewing it." Hannah's camera captured every word. The live stream comments flooded across her screen. Inside the barn, an agent's voice called out. "Live servers confirmed. Active domestic routing." Another agent emerged from the barn holding a portable drive unit in a clear evidence bag. "Matches the footage," he said. Briggs's jaw tightened. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said quickly. "Those systems were dormant." "Dormant systems don't reroute encrypted civilian data," the agent replied calmly. The words hung heavy in the night air. Titan shifted slightly, stepping closer to Caleb. Briggs glanced at the dog, then back at the agents. "This land was under conditional maintenance agreements," he said. "Private oversight." The lead agent opened the folder again. "And this?" he asked quietly. He held up a printed page. "Denton Property Incident Uncooperative Landowner. Recommended neutralization of access." Briggs's face drained of color. "That's incomplete documentation," he said. The agent's voice did not rise. "We have the rest." For a long moment, the only sound was wind moving through the pasture grass. Then, 2 federal officers stepped behind Sheriff Briggs. "Sheriff Walter Briggs," one said steadily, "you are being placed under federal investigation pending review of contract compliance and obstruction of oversight." They did not raise their voices. They did not escalate. But the meaning was unmistakable. Briggs looked at Caleb, not with anger, not even with fear, with something closer to disbelief. "You had no idea what you were stepping into," Briggs muttered. Caleb met his gaze calmly. "I still don't." Briggs lowered his eyes. He did not resist, as they escorted him toward a vehicle. The contractors who had fled earlier were nowhere to be seen. Their vehicles had vanished down the mountain long before the federal arrival. Inside the barn, agents continued documenting equipment, photographing panels, sealing servers in evidence containers. Hannah's live stream continued uninterrupted. "This is federal confirmation," she said quietly into the camera. "Live unauthorized surveillance infrastructure discovered beneath a private rural property in Coldwater County." The viewer count climbed higher. Caleb stepped away from the center of the field and sat down slowly on the wooden bridge. His injured leg trembled slightly from hours of strain. Titan moved with him, lowering himself carefully beside Caleb. For the first time since the gunshot underground, the dog relaxed fully, resting his head against Caleb's thigh. Medics approached quietly and checked Titan's bandage again. "He's stable," one confirmed. Caleb nodded, exhaustion finally settling into his bones. Floodlights bathed the barn in stark white. The hum beneath the soil gradually faded as agents powered down the remaining systems, one by one. The blinking green LED went dark. The mountains felt different in the sudden quiet. Lighter. Hannah approached and sat beside Caleb on the bridge. "You didn't walk away," she said softly. "No, most would have." Caleb looked down at Titan. He didn't. Titan lifted his head slightly, pressing one heavy paw against Caleb's chest. The same gesture he had made overseas after pulling him from rubble. A reminder. Alive. Grounded. Caleb swallowed hard. For the first time since buying the dollar farm, the tension in his chest loosened. Not gone, but eased. Across the field, agents sealed the bunker hatch under official tape. The evidence trucks began loading equipment carefully. Coldwater County would wake up to headlines by morning. But for now, under floodlights and frost, truth stood plainly in the open. Caleb exhaled slowly. The land wasn't humming anymore. It was quiet, and the silence felt earned. Weeks passed before the mountains felt like mountains again. The federal vehicles disappeared. The floodlights were gone. The barn doors stood open in plain daylight, no longer hiding steel and circuitry beneath the soil. Agents had sealed the bunker officially, cataloged every server, and removed the unauthorized hardware piece by piece. Summit Ridge infrastructure vanished from Coldwater County almost overnight. Corporate statements were issued. Investigations announced. Indictments followed. Sheriff Walter Briggs resigned before the paperwork forced him out. Coldwater returned to its usual rhythm of feed deliveries, church bells, and small-town gossip. But Caleb's farm did not return to what it had been, because it had never truly been just a farm. Spring came slow to the Blue Ridge. Snow melted into the creek under the wooden bridge. Frost loosened its grip on fence rails. The fields softened from brittle brown to early green. Titan walked the pasture each morning beside Caleb, shoulder scar visible but healed. The fur had grown back unevenly along the wound, a permanent reminder beneath thick black and tan coat. He moved slightly slower now, but he moved proudly. The barn roof had been repaired, the broken boards replaced. Sunlight streamed through clean windows, where dust once floated heavy in stale air. Inside the farmhouse, fresh paint covered old scars. The fireplace crackled steadily in evenings, without fear beneath the floorboards. And on the gate at the edge of the property, a new wooden sign had been mounted. Titan Ridge Veterans Sanctuary. It had been Hannah's idea at first. "You turned exposure into protection," she'd said one afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table months earlier. Why stop there? Caleb hadn't answered right away. But the idea lingered. He knew what it meant to return home without a clear path. To feel the silence louder than gunfire. To sit in a room full of people and still feel alone. And he knew what it meant to have one loyal presence that never questioned whether you were worth saving. Word traveled fast among veteran networks. Within weeks, the first truck arrived carrying a Marine named Lucas and an aging Labrador with clouded eyes. Then a retired Army mechanic named Walter came with 2 duffel bags and no clear direction. Then a young Coast Guard rescue swimmer whose service dog had been medically retired. The sanctuary wasn't polished. It didn't need to be. It was land. Quiet. Work. Responsibility. Caleb built small cabins along the edge of the pasture with donated lumber. Martha volunteered twice a week, running basic health checks and listening more than she spoke. Hannah visited often, not as a reporter anymore, but as a friend. In the evenings, veterans gathered around the barn, not to hide secrets beneath it, but to share stories above it. Titan walked among them gently, accepting careful hands along his back. He seemed to know who needed him most, pausing beside the ones who stared too long at the horizon. One afternoon near sunset, Caleb stood alone in the barn, organizing tools along the wall where the steel hatch had once been concealed. The federal seal still marked the reinforced panel beneath new planks, officially decommissioned. The hum was gone. Completely. He ran a hand across the wood thoughtfully. A loose board shifted slightly. Caleb paused. He knelt and lifted the plank carefully. Beneath it, wedged between old support beams, was a weathered envelope. Yellowed, fragile, no dust on top. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting inside was steady but aged. To whoever finds this, if you're reading this, it means you refused to sell. This land was chosen long before I was. We built the relay station here to protect the valley, to ensure communication if the world went dark. It was meant to serve people, not monitor them. But systems change hands. Intent shifts. Power rarely retires quietly. If someone tries to use this place for silence instead of safety, I hope it finds a guardian. Denton. Caleb read the last line twice. He folded the letter carefully and slid it into his jacket pocket. Outside, laughter echoed across the pasture. Titan barked once, playful for the first time in weeks. Caleb stepped out into the fading light. The mountains glowed gold along their edges. The fields shimmered in long evening shadows. Lucas and Walter were repairing fencing near the creek. Martha sat on the porch with a mug of tea, watching the horizon. Titan ran across the field toward Caleb, slower than he once had but strong. When he reached him, he pressed that familiar paw against Caleb's chest. The same gesture. The same grounding presence. Caleb knelt and rested his forehead against Titan's. "Guess it found one," he said quietly. The wind moved softly through the pasture grass. No hum beneath the soil. No hidden lights blinking in the dark. Just mountains, land, and a farm that no one had wanted for $1. Now worth more than any offer could measure. As the sun slipped fully behind the ridge, Titan lay beside Caleb in the grass, both of them facing the valley below. The world felt wide again, not because danger had vanished, but because it had been faced. And this time, they had stood their ground together. If you believe some things are worth protecting, your land, your dignity, your word, type yes in the comments below. And if you've ever had to stand your ground when folks thought you'd back down, we'd love to hear your story. Subscribe and stay with us for more stories about justice, grit, and good people holding the line right here in the land of the free.